Dr. Amory Lovins, take it away.
Well, thank you. Uh, Good day, and thank you for the honor of reporting on the global energy revolution that is taking us to a cheaper, cleaner, resilient, and climate safer future. The world has just had two big energy shocks in 5 years: Putin's war in Ukraine, then Trump's war with Iran. As Kingsmill Bond says, one shock gives you pause, a twin shock gives you wisdom. And Michael Liebreich notes that in the past 60 years, we've actually had 14 oil price shocks, eight of them big. But this time is different because, unlike the twin energy shocks in the 1970s, when we had no quick alternative to belt tightening, we now have better, faster, cheaper, and scalable non-fossil alternatives. Britain's Climate Change Committee calculates that just one more fossil fuel shock would cost more than eliminating fossil fuels by 2050. So this time, many countries, rather than renaming the problem by just importing fossil fuels from somewhere else, are choosing four fundamental shifts: from fossil fuels to renewables, fuels to electricity, inefficient to efficient use, and centralized to distributed supply. Together, more efficient use in blue, renewable supply lower down in aqua, and electrification of heat and mobility, the middle wedge in dark green, are squeezing out fossil fuels at the bottom in gray. Those fuels, 86% of total energy supply as of last year, is as misleading a guide to the future as was, say, the number of horses in 1900, shortly before cars displaced them. Three-fourths of people also live in a country that imports more energy than it exports, and the 22% of energy that is net imported is, of course, vulnerable to shocks with big political effects. Now, the tipping point for this transformation is neither in past history nor in future mystery. It is right now. The world's total use of fossil fuels peaked around 2019 and began bumping along a plateau with minor excursions due to weather or war. But last year, renewable energy saved $480 billion worth of fossil fuels and grew 10%, more than any other supply. And around this year, the trend of the previous 2 centuries is reversing as carbon-free power begins to meet all demand growth, then more, tipping fossil fuels into steepening decline sometime before 2030. In the US, every sector has already passed peak fossil fuel. In coal-intensive China and India, fossil fuel generation fell last year. Now, the left-hand chart shows how fossil fuel industries project their continued dominance in total energy supply, without mentioning that about two-thirds is wasted before it even reaches the customers, and then a lot more after that. The second graph, focused on climate, shows paths for emitting less carbon by phasing out fossil fuels. The third graph shows how, by shifting from fossil fuels in red to renewable electricity in green. And then, using energy even more efficiently, the fourth graph saves more fossil fuels sooner with less renewable power. So that's my story for today, the fourth graph. This vision is quickly gaining favor because efficiency and renewables are not only cheaper, cleaner, safer, fairer, faster than fossil fuels, they also provide energy security and sovereignty without trade-off or compromise. This is most obvious in Asia, which used 4/5 of the oil and gas flowing through the Strait of Hormuz and was hardest hit by its closure. So Asia is abandoning the fossil fuel growth that it was projected to drive. Now, efficiency and renewables can meet the needs of affordable and stable prices, reliable and equitable supply, and public health and safety simultaneously for all and forever, because every 5 days the Earth receives more solar energy than the total known reserves of all fossil fuels. So capturing just a tiny fraction of that flow can meet all human needs. Traditional energy changes are linear, but today's revolution is exponential. Here's the global growth since 2010 in generation by solar in orange and wind in aqua, plus the installed fleets of electric vehicles in dark blue and battery storage in dark red. Just last year, the world's solar generation grew 30%, battery storage grew 66%, 82 in China, And this new normal needs an agile mindset because it's hard to catch an exponential curve from behind. Defying a federal blockade on renewables, the U.S. shares in this rapid growth, but it dominates old energy industries, not new. America is not the technological epicenter of clean energy as it was for the internet. For now, the clean energy epicenter is China, where far-sighted policies have built about half the world's renewable energy and even more of many supply chains. The U.S. is starting to catch up, but from far behind and despite perverse national policy. Most of the world's solar power is now in emerging markets, and two-thirds of those countries are deploying it faster than the U.S. China, Europe, and others resolutely pursue consistent long-term strategies and will gladly grab any market where the U.S. falters. By 2024, China was making more money exporting green technologies than the U.S. made exporting fossil fuels. America is a petrostate, extracting about as much oil as Saudi Arabia plus Russia, while China races to become the first major electrostate, a sure destination. And as we'll see later, many developing countries are eagerly leapfrogging over the rest of the fossil fuel era to get reliable energy faster at low and stable prices. Australia shows how these trends can converge. In the last decade, strong solar and wind power growth cut coal power by 2/5 in 10 years and raised the nation's renewable power share from 14% to 40%. Rooftop solar costs most Australians just 5 US cents a kilowatt hour. That's several-fold less than grid power and several-fold less than the US rooftop solar price, even though we buy the same equipment, but they install it smarter. Batteries, and they have a lot less red tape than we do. Batteries are booming, and in just 1 year in the national electricity market, which is 82% of the national total, the batteries helped cut evening peak electricity prices in half in 1 year by substituting midday solar power for costlier gas. Now, worldwide, renewable electricity generation in green has zoomed past nuclear in magenta, gas in blue, and coal in white. Solar output alone passed nuclear output April 24 and added 1 billion watts, a gigawatt of capacity every 12 hours. In 2025, the world added over twice as much solar and wind capacity as it had nuclear capacity built over 56 years. This year, solar will outgenerate nuclear. Modern renewables now look set to add more generation in 5 years, maybe 4, than in the past century. And they've shifted energy economics from fuel extraction, so the more you dig, the more it costs, the less you buy, to equipment manufacturing, so the more you build, the less it costs, the more you buy. So those cost curves have crossed, triggering the green curve's exponential growth. As Tom Friedman says, the more we buy, the cheaper it gets, so we buy more, so it gets cheaper. Very important feedback. Thus, electricity's renewable share is set to double from 1/3 to at least 2/3 by mid-century. And the most formidable competitor is not even shown in this graph. It is efficient use that wrings more work from our energy. Bloomberg New Energy Finance, the source of this graph, leads in tracking the supply side transition, but doesn't yet comparably analyze efficient use. So they're showing a need for more supply than we probably will need. Now, in the 50 years through 2025, saved energy, about 2/3 due to smarter technologies, dropped U.S. energy use by 65%, with immense cumulative savings. Renewables, meanwhile, tripled, but with 27 times less cumulative impact. Who knew? Renewables get virtually all the headlines because they're visible, while energy is invisible, and the energy you don't use is almost unimaginable. Yet saved energy is half of the world's historic decarbonization and at least half of future decarbonization. So when we emit it, we are making the clean supply problem look twice as hard as it should be. Another bit of history, around 1975, U.S. government and industry all said that the total input energy needed to make a dollar of GDP could never drop. A year later, I heretically suggested it could drop 72% over the next 50 years. And as you just saw, it actually dropped 65%. And yet, just the innovations already added by 2010 can save another threefold, twice what I originally cost, at a third the real cost. Uh, and, and today that looks conservative because optimizing buildings, vehicles, and factories as whole systems, not as piles of isolated parts, can often make very big energy savings cost less than small or no savings, turning diminishing returns into increasing returns. Vigorously applied, such integrative design could quintuple global end-use energy productivity by about 2060, or triple it by about 2040, as documented in this foundational paper. I'll give you some examples shortly, but this is only end-use efficiency, that is, the services we get per unit of final energy delivered to the user, like electricity or gasoline. That does not yet include the 2 or 3-fold upstream savings from electrification with primary renewables. And those two kinds of savings multiply, squeezing out fossil fuels even faster. Here's how that works. 3 columns of this chart, starting on the left, illustrate the supply side shift. At the upper left, the huge conversion losses of thermal power plants in red vanish at the lower left when solar and wind power in green generate directly without a steam cycle. In the middle column, fuel combustion at the top provides heat about 4-fold less efficiently than a renewably powered heat pump at the bottom, concentrating free low-temperature heat. And in the right column, gasoline and diesel engines with their big losses in red are 2 to 4 times less efficient than renewably powered motors in battery electric vehicles at the lower right. So if you go across the bottom row, those systems replacing fossil fuels with renewable electricity are together several-fold more efficient in turning renewable electricity into delivered services. But notice this does not yet include higher efficiency in the equipment being powered, or the building being heated, or the vehicle being moved. First, doing that end-use efficiency makes the heat pumps and the EV batteries smaller, cheaper, less mineral intensive. Both those kinds of efficiency multiply then to form primary energy efficiency. And the upstream or supply side savings of around 2 or 3-fold avoid nearly $5 trillion of global waste each year. That's almost 5% of the world economy. And yet they're only about half as important as the largely overlooked gains that I'll next illustrate in end-use efficiency. Now, the world agreed in Glasgow to double the speed of saving energy overall, and that's before including integrative design. But integrative design can make the end-use efficiency resource several-fold bigger than commonly supposed, but actually cost less because it uses not more but fewer devices and not fancier but simpler devices, more artfully chosen, combined, timed, and sequenced. We're familiar with resources like copper ore bodies and oil reservoirs, finite and depletable assemblages of atoms. In contrast, energy efficiency resources are infinitely expandable assemblages of ideas, depleting only stupidity, a very abundant resource. A few examples. My wife Judy and I live here, 7,100 feet up in the Rocky Mountains near Aspen, where temperatures used to dip as low as minus 47 F, minus 44 C. The central atrium you see behind me, seen here in a February snowstorm, has so far produced 84 passive solar banana crops with no heating system. And it was cheaper to build that way because 43 years ago, the extra cost of super efficiency was less than we saved up front by leaving out the heating system. So this house helped inspire several 100,000 European passive buildings with no heating and roughly normal construction costs. A Bangkok analog saved 90% of the air conditioning energy with better comfort and normal construction cost. And practically everyone on Earth lives in a climate somewhere between Bangkok and Old Snowmass. But wherever you live, integrative design gives many benefits from each expenditure. So in the upper middle image, that white arch behind me has 12 different functions, but it has only one cost. Let's examine progress in office buildings by a series of green energy intensity numbers and yellow savings scores. RMI's integrative design to retrofit the Empire State Building initially saved 38% of its energy, later rising to 51%, with a 3-year payback because smaller mechanicals paid up front for most of the efficiency. Now the owner hopes to raise the savings to 80% by going back to do the mechanicals. A major energy service company also offered a 3-year payback on this project, but with disintegrated design saving 6 times less energy than we saved. 3 years later, our cost-effective Denver retrofit saved 70%, making this difficult half-century-old federal complex more efficient than what was then the best new U.S. office at NREL, which in turn is only a third as efficient as RMI's passive net positive no mechanicals office 10 minutes from here, using 1/9 the normal energy. We think it's the highest performant commercial building in the coldest North American climate zone. And then there's this Bavarian building using 2/5 less energy than that. And yet these technologies all existed over a decade ago. What mainly improved is not so much technology as design, the way we apply the technology. And both of those keep improving. So the Dutch Energiesprong method of super outsolation, like adding a tea cozy around your house, can profitably retrofit many buildings to net zero efficiency, and installation can take as little as a day. Even in tropical climates, traditional passive building design can keep you feeling about 29 to 34 Fahrenheit degrees cooler, while redesigning big mechanical space cooling systems can at least triple their efficiency, all with excellent economics. RMI's Global Cooling Prize just quintupled air conditioner efficiency, now heading to market from 2 major vendors. But 7 years ago, an experiment in Singapore revealed a startling alternative. A Princeton group showed that purely radiative cooling, rather than blowing cold air at you, would keep people comfortable outdoors in Singapore without moving, drying, or cooling the air. There was a light 0.3 meter per second breeze. But instead, in a shaded but open-ended pavilion, people stayed cooled by radiating their bodies' far infrared rays into panels circulating slightly cooled water and shielded from the humid air by a thin plastic film. So if you cool the water to about 73 to 77 F, that can deliver comfort in air up to at least 90 F, 32 C, at 80% relative humidity. And the water can often be cooled passively with no electricity, potentially about eliminating the world's long-term growth in peak electricity demand. Inside buildings, this fist-size heat pump can deliver 6 to 15 units of hot water per unit of electricity, while this electric conduction cooking system is 2 to 4.5 times more efficient than induction and otherwise superior, thanks partly to vacuum-insulated cookware you can get online that also works with induction cooktops. That's what we're doing now. Industry uses half the world's energy and electricity. RMI's latest $60+ billion worth of redesigns across many kinds of industries typically found about 30 to 60% energy savings on retrofits, paying back in a few years, and far outperforming the orange zone in the upper left, where most energy service companies deliver disintegrated design. In new industrial projects, integrative design generally yielded 40 to over 90% energy savings, with nearly always lower than normal capital costs. For example, our redesign of this Texas Instruments semiconductor wafer fab used 40% less energy with 30% lower construction costs. So it was built in Texas, not China. By 2017, it had inspired cutting company-wide chip-making energy, normalized per chip layer, by 62%, water intensity 56%, greenhouse gas intensity 57%, and that continues. RMI's next wafer fab design showed how to save about 2/3 of its energy use and half its capital cost while replacing all 22,000 tons of chillers with any of 3 natural cooling methods that can yield upwards of 100 units of cooling per unit of electricity. But many of the biggest industrial savings come from simply moving fluids more efficiently. You see, half the world's electricity turns motors, and half the motor torque turns pumps and fans, moving fluids through pipes and ducts. But just better pipe and duct design can save 80 to 90+% of the friction and therefore the pumping power, 97% in this building. So if everybody did this, it could save roughly half the world's coal-fired electricity, or a fifth of all electricity, and it would pay for itself typically in under a year in retrofit and instantly a new build. But this isn't yet in any standard engineering textbook, official study, industry forecast, or climate model. Why not? Because it's not a technology. It's a design method. And few people yet think of design as a path to speed and scale. So to wring out friction, we simply use big pipes and small pumps, not small pipes and big pumps. That's because the friction in the pipe goes down as nearly the 5th power of diameter, but the cost of the fatter pipe goes up as only about the 2nd power of diameter. Notice also we're raising up the pump on the right to meet the pipe rather than dipping the pipe down to meet a pump on the floor and then back up again. That eliminates 4 elbows, right angle bends, and their friction. And then to eliminate the rest of the elbows, we lay out the pipes first, then the equipment. So those tan chillers normally in a neat row get staggered until the elbows go away. We lay out supply pipes as if they were drains. We bend mines, not pipes. Now think of the whole power and pumping system. From the fuel burned in the thermal power plant to the end use, there are many successive losses compounding. So only 1/10 of the energy in the fuel comes out the pipe as flow. But now turn those compounding losses around backwards from right to left, they become compounding savings. And every unit of flow or friction you save in the pipe saves 10 units of fuel cost, emissions, and global weirding back at the power plant. And as you go back upstream, the components get smaller and cheaper. So the total capital cost goes down. Well, next, as you're making the motor systems 5 or 10 times smaller, because there's less work to do, combine them with 35 improvements to the motor system, and you raise the potential savings from 1/5 to 1/3 of the world's electricity. That's a big opportunity to be missing from all the forecasts and climate models. Big white space. Now let's apply the same logic to big old data centers. 2/3 of the fuel fed into the power plant is lost in the plant and a bit in the grid. Half the metered electricity is then lost in the cooling system and the uninterruptible power supplies, together half the total capital cost, before reaching the servers. Then half the server energy doesn't reach the chips because it's lost in inefficient, usually very underloaded power supplies and lots of superfluous fans. Next comes severe underutilization of computing resources, partly through insufficient virtualization. So they used to have, and some still do, 1 physical server per app. The resulting energy flow down at the bottom right is about to vanish, so let's magnify it first. So next comes bloatware, running many unnecessary threads and processes and making simple tasks very complex because compute cycles were cheaper than programmers' attention and someone else was buying the electricity. Downstream of all that, you may even have inefficient business processes. In all, the red numbers at the bottom reveal that just a few 100,000ths of the original fuel energy is actually producing customer value. Where should we start fixing this? Downstream. just like in pumping, start at the end. First, write elegantly terse code, optimally compiled, with the goal that every compute cycle is a needed and wanted one. I'd assume this would save an order of magnitude, a factor 10 in compute cycles, but recent tests suggest it's 2 orders of magnitude, or maybe a lot more. And the shift to mobile devices now makes efficient code valuably stretch battery life. Next step, at least quadruple server efficiency. Now we can do even more. And the servers will then need a lot less cooling and power supply, both of which can be done in smarter ways. And we could even save half the utility losses by using fuel cell trigeneration, cheaper than the UPSs it displaces. Well, multiply these savings from downstream to upstream, and you cut the energy use by at least 2 orders of magnitude. In the project for which we made this diagram in 2009, the client rejected most of our recommendations, so we were only able to triple the data center's efficiency at the same capital cost. Very disappointing. We hardly ever do that badly. But our partner EDS said that if our recommendations they agreed with, which is about all of them, had all been adopted, we would have saved about 95% of the energy and half the capital cost. Now, even without most of the integrative design or many other innovations, U.S. electricity use could shrink by a quarter by 2050, despite all electric autos and a 2.6-fold bigger GDP. And, we should have bought a lot more than just this quadrupled electric end use efficiency in our Reinventing Fire book, because that efficiency was costing 10 times less than the electricity it saved. So we didn't buy nearly enough of it. And then there are a lot more layers of, say, industrial efficiency. Heavy industry can use radically better processes like making ultra-pure iron from ferrous dirt. It doesn't even have to be ore at the temperature of a cup of hot coffee by using electrochemistry instead of pyrometallurgy. But also, smarter structural design and new business models can profitably save at least half the world's cement and steel that now release 15% of global CO2. Careful specification and application of concrete can save another twofold, together saving 3/4 before adopting lower carbon materials or production processes. Let me give you some examples of the efficient structural design. Substituting tension for compression structures typically looks better, costs less, and uses about 1/8 as many tons. Pouring concrete into curvy fabric forms, not rigid prismatic forms, can often save over half the concrete by putting strength and stiffness only where you need them, and then the weight savings compound because you need less strength to hold up less weight. An airy 3D printed bridge can carry mainly its users, while massive concrete bridges support mainly their own weight. And this stainless steel bridge, by the way, was 3D printed. Most importantly, floor slabs like this one total about half the weight of a typical mid or high-rise building. A 2-inch thick folded concrete floor slab like this, or a shallow vaulted dome, can replace a 12-inch thick slab, cost less, and save 3/4 of the cement and all of the steel. Thin floor slabs and better energy design can save a further 15% or so of core structural materials and 3/4 of the energy in a new mid or high-rise building like the Singapore one at the upper right, while increasing net rentable space by a stunning 55%. How? Well, designing out, as you see at the left, a vertical meter of mechanical plenum at each story fits 3 stories with normal 9-foot 2-inch ceiling height, 2.8 meters, into the current height of 2 stories. Cost, complexity, and time fall dramatically. Why would you build any other way? And cement is just the start. Our 1999 book with Paul Hawken, Natural Capitalism, found that the U.S. economy's flow of materials is over 99.9% pure waste, perhaps the biggest business bonanza on the planet. What about mobility? Well, the world is buying nearly $1 trillion worth of EVs this year, led by oil import-dependent Asia. Electrification roughly triples a car efficiency, but first improving the vehicle itself can cut by 2- or 3-fold the energy needed to move it. You see, 2/3 of that energy is caused by the car's weight. And BMW showed how integrative design can lightweight a car at competitive cost. This i3 that I drive weighed about 660 pounds less than normal, but it made money from the first unit off the assembly line and then for $250,000 more. Because it's carbon fiber that saves that 300 kilograms is paid for by the batteries that its lightness saves. Batteries are the costliest component of the EV. And of course, fewer batteries also mean faster recharging with less electricity, infrastructure emissions, and investment. EPRI found that such savings from doubling the efficiency of autos before electrifying them could save the US about $200 billion a year. Now, this car's integrative design snowballs weight savings far more than usually assumed. Its manufacturing is radically frugal, eliminating the two hardest and costliest steps in automaking. It's much better for workers. So the efficiency is quadrupled to the equivalent of 124 miles a gallon without compromise, and with many driver advantages, of which my favorite is half normal turn radius. Now, the next game changer could be a couple of hypercars from small firms I've advised, both production ready. The first one from Aptera in San Diego is headed for production in the next few quarters. And most drivers will not need to recharge this carbon fiber 2-seat three-wheeler or this Dutch metal 5-seat four-wheeler because they're about 3 times as efficient as a Tesla. So their topside solar cells capture enough energy for ordinary daily driving without plugging in, bypassing the infrastructure for charging and its electricity supplies. But cars are just the start. Using the same automotive components, Tesla's battery electric heavy truck has been ramping up mass production since April, and it can triple to sextuple the efficiency we now get from the 18-wheeler diesel fleet, and with great economics. Then there's this thoroughly flight-tested air taxi that could fly nonstop from Denver to London with 1/8 the fuel use of a typical business jet. A mid-size hydrogen model has been announced, plus importantly, a transonic business jet for 2030 service with doubled efficiency and cabin size. The superlaminar aerodynamics in these planes can scale to probably 737 size, and it could blow up aviation's business models. So sustainable aviation fuel, the industry's current focus, can be overtaken by all-electric aircraft. Now, ancient flying reptiles with tough but paper-thin bones had a wingspan up to 10 or 11 meters. That's 3 times as big as our biggest birds that fly today. But now their fossils can inspire fossil-free flight. A couple of years ago, a quiet 5-passenger battery electric plane flew about a 600-pound payload for 386 statute miles. It's kind of like San Diego to San Jose. Using no runway, it takes off and lands vertically from a backyard or driveway or roof. In China today, uncrewed commercial versions are electrically hauling nearly 1,800 pounds for about 125 miles. The world's top battery company says it's planning an 8-ton version with nearly a 1,900-mile range in the next year or two. And most leading aerospace companies are working hard on electric aviation. Major airlines are planning to launch downtown to airfield electric aircraft service this year at prices they think will fall to Uber premium levels for cars. But that's just the start, going well beyond the 3- to 5-fold efficiency gains that NASA has already found practical for conventional airplanes. How? Well, by efficiency revolution in the 4 forces of aviation: lift, weight, drag, and thrust. The lift to drag ratio can be roughly doubled or tripled. Even light composite structures can be made featherweight by covering an airy cellular lattice of little plastic sticks with a tough polymer membrane. Propellers that fold in on themselves with no tips or that spiral like tulips can nearly eliminate turbulence and noise. powered by ultralight motors and electronics. And if you need batteries or fuel cells, they too are getting several-fold lighter. But if you fly in daylight, as many missions do, you may need very little storage if you put ultralight solar cells on the aircraft's upper and lower surfaces, since it gets nearly as much light reflected from below as from the sun above. High altitude sun is 20 or 25% stronger, and cold makes the cells more efficient. Now, Airbus has commercialized a solar aircraft that can stay aloft for months. Some military solar platforms stay up indefinitely. A solar aircraft took a pilot into the stratosphere a quarter century ago, and others flown around the Earth, and you can buy a two-seat version today. Moreover, today's standard solar cells are about 23% efficient. The best are 37%. Optical antennas approaching 80% wouldn't violate the laws of physics. So like the Aptera car you saw 3 slides ago, we could probably make an aircraft efficient enough to propel just with solar energy captured on its surfaces. Now, electric flight could also have winning economics for 3 reasons. The electric planes cost less to buy and far less to run. Electricity is about as much cheaper than fuel as batteries are heavier than fuel. And every decade after you buy a battery electric plane, you can probably upgrade its batteries to double its range and therefore quadruple its served city. So it adds ever more value, unlike fuel planes, which only shed value with age. So put this whole story together, as I do in an annual Stanford lecture, and I suspect my grandsons may be able to fly the Pacific on solar-powered aircraft. That many aviation industry leaders loved when I proposed it to a couple of their major conferences in 2019. You see, for over a decade, says NASA, we've had the technology to create 3 to 5-fold more efficient planes if someone would make them and someone would buy them. Now we can see even greater gains. But why take a century to do this incrementally as now, when we can leapfrog straight to it? Trouble is that major airplane buyers, even if they have the capital, are understandably risk averse. Airframe makers don't want to risk huge development investments for a radically better product that might not sell. So incrementalism continues as we squander fuel, money, carbon budget, and precious time. Climate won't wake. Business as usual ultimately won't work. Aviation's license to operate will erode. Our shareholders, voters, and children will judge us negligent. But what if a powerful consortium of major customers, airlines, lessors, delivery and air logistics firms, the Pentagon, relieve the airframe makers' market risk so they could fully focus their skills and ambitions? The buyers could collectively solicit a super efficient airplane by publishing very demanding specs, very clean and at least quadrupled efficiency, and collectively commit to buy X copies a year for Y years at price Z from whomever first brings it to market, with the consolation prize for the runner-up. This elicits then rewards innovation for the airplanes they'll buy anyway. Unbundling buying airplanes from buying innovation changes the supplier's culture and brings out the best talent and their best innovators. This yields a very different product slate, reducing risk to both parties, most of all to buyers. This method is called a golden carrot, advanced market offerings or advanced market commitments. It's worked well since 1990 for over 20 diverse solicitations in countries from Sweden to France to America to India, and I think it's time we seriously considered it for airplanes. That could decouple flying from climate change, and unlike carbon offsets or SAF, it could also slash fuel costs and the risks of fuel price volatility. In this teachable moment, it could greatly increase energy security and national security, and it could unleash a huge burst of innovation that could transform aviation forever. What are we waiting for? Add up all these and many other savings, and the hydrocarbon reserves unsellable for competitive reasons look bigger than the reserves unburnable for climate reasons, putting owners even more at risk for market competition than from climate regulation. The cost of getting U.S. autos completely off oil fell from $18 per say barrel 15 years ago to zero for many models today, and even less over the next few years. Or to put it the other way around, for a gasoline car to compete with an electric one in China today, crude oil would have to fall below $15 a barrel. So oil became uncompetitive even at low prices before it became unavailable even at high prices. And now methane gas is on this track too. I used to think gas markets would hold up decades longer than oil, but now I think they're likelier to dwindle together with every gas market now under serious competitive threat, even as U.S. gas export policies threaten to create oversupply abroad and shortage at home. Competition with efficient use is especially keen. With fuels and electricity, technology and design are both moving efficiency into fast forward. For example, prior lighting improvements were largely swept away as LEDs in a decade got 30 times more efficient, 20 times brighter, 10 times cheaper, and ultimately they'll save about an eighth of the world's electricity. What else changes this fast? Modern renewables. LEDs backwards are PVs, turning light into electricity instead of the opposite. Solar and in aqua wind power costs have plunged to or below the dashed lines, the cost of fossil fuels at existing steam plants, often making them uneconomic just to run. But the revolution goes a lot deeper than that. We're shifting from molecules and atoms to bits and packets, from hardware to software, from hierarchies to networks. Electricity is changing from centralized supply-focused fossil and uranium-fueled and brittle to distributed, customer-focused, renewable, and resilient. And its deepest change is how the information age informs, enables, and organizes customers to take power into their own hands. It's wise to sell customers what they want before someone else does. Customers are figuring out that they can buy a lot fewer electrons, use them more productively and more timely, produce their own, even trade them with each other. For example, Dutch customers can buy renewable electricity directly from other customers on this peer-to-peer network of Van de Bron, literally from the source. A friend of mine bought his electricity from the guy in the upper left photo because the price was right, and it's a really cute piglet. And then he got a long handwritten Christmas card from his electricity supplier. What big utility could dream of such customer intimacy? Indeed, powerful disruptors are now converging on the electricity industry from at least 8 directions. These 8 Pac-Men of the apocalypse move fast. They don't just add, they exponentiate. They're not lone wolves. They hunt in packs. They multiply quickly, and they can gobble half of utility revenues in this decade. Together, they're creating an alien competitive landscape faster than most utility cultures can cope. A decade ago, someone said all central power plants were dinosaurs. And the full quote was, too big, too inflexible, not even relevant for backup power in the long run. Who said that? Not Greenpeace. It was Union Bank of Switzerland. And now a whole new wave of Pac-Men is coming over the hill. Solar power has now eclipsed every other kind of global generating capacity, largely because, like wind power, it's fundamentally cheaper and faster than fossil or nuclear. The IEA estimated that 96% 3 years ago of new solar and offshore wind power was cheaper than new coal or gas power. And about 3/4 of solar and wind would beat existing fossil fuel plants. Last year, Bloomberg estimated renewables won for about 4/5 of total electricity generation and beat just the cost of coal or gas in existing plants in 1/4 of the global economy. Bloomberg also confirmed that the cheapest way to meet a flat load is now solar or wind plus backup, which can be demand side or storage or renewable or fueled. Costs remain about flat for fossil power, rising for nuclear, but they keep broadly falling, trending down for renewables and especially for storage. And batteries now get more investment and add more capacity than nuclear. Batteries are doubling every couple of years. And batteries convert solar or wind from when you have it to when you want it. So they have eliminated the supposed need for continuous power from thermal plants. Therefore, the clean firm argument has gone away because of cheap batteries, and you can't even make a business case for anything with a steam cycle because even if the heat is free, because the other parts, the steam cycle, cost too much. Now, this familiar Bloomberg history of levelized wholesale electricity costs, similar to IRENA's global database, shows why unsubsidized renewables win and keep pulling ahead. It's about feedback. And adding grid integration costs for all the technologies shown would actually tend to widen renewables cost advantage. That's because thermal plants tend to have bigger, longer, more abrupt, and far less predictable failures, forced outages, than solar and wind power do. Therefore, the fossil or nuclear plants need more and costlier backup for the same reliability. To be sure, solar, wind, and storage, totaling a fourth more than total U.S. generating capacity, are still stuck for an average of 5 years in queues awaiting interconnections, or a decade awaiting approvals for a new transmission right-of-way. And over half that much proposed capacity has already been withdrawn. You can't afford to wait, but new power lines can often be displaced by efficiency, timely use, and distributed resources, or by advanced transmission wires. A new kind of conductor from a company I advised till last fall can carry 2 or 3 times the current of traditional steel core aluminum conductors with half the losses, superior safety and reliability, and excellent economics. This novel conductor is an important way to decongest many regional grids for rapid renewable expansion by reconductoring existing towers using standard tools, equipment, and training. And this can often avoid a new right-of-way with vastly lower cost, risk, and time. In fact, an older but less capable type of advanced conductor carrying only twice the current, not 2 or 3 times and soon 4, could nearly quadruple the U.S. transmission that's addable by 2035. And this could meet over 80% of the interzonal transmission needs to exceed 90% renewable electricity. This better new technology should avoid even more. So for bottlenecked renewables and congested grids, help is on the way. Renewables also scale up in a fundamentally different way. Traditionally, we would build giant cathedral-like power plants costing billions, taking many years to license and build. But now each year, with about comparable capital, you can build a factory that produces each year thereafter enough solar cells to generate each year thereafter as much electricity as your cathedral ultimately will. So solar output worldwide is scaled faster than cell phones. Big, slow, complex power plants can't catch up. And over 90% of the world's and America's net capacity additions are now renewable. And they can move incredibly quickly. For example, at the end of 2018, coal-dependent Vietnam had 1/10 of a gigawatt of solar power. 2 years later, it was 16.5 gigawatts. 9 of that was on 100,000 rooftops or similar structures. It was equivalent to building half the nation's coal plants in a year once the grid catches up. And by the way, 72% of those additions were installed just in the month of December, mostly in the last week of December. I don't think they got much sleep before a 9-month window closed for a juicy feed-in tariff. So by 2023, Vietnam had over 21 gigawatts of renewables, nearly all privately financed. Those communists are impressive capitalists. Similarly, grassroots Pakistanis raised solar power from 3 to 22% of total electricity in 4 years, saving over $18 billion in oil and gas imports and canceling 21 unneeded LNG cargoes. Pakistan, skeptical about renewables in 2019, now targets 95% domestic clean electricity by 2040. China has a whole county rooftop solar program that does centralized auction and batch installation across the rooftops of an entire region. In 2017, in China, rooftop PVs were not a thing. 5 years later, they were 40% of total and 61% of new Chinese solar power. 1 of every 4 solar panels in the world was on a Chinese roof. Globally, in 2023, distributed solar got as much investment as utility scale solar. It continues to soar. And in the US, it's been cheaper than grid power since 2020, and Japan since 2014. Now, this all means we don't need speculative, slow, costly technologies like nuclear fusion and fission, except, of course, the well-engineered and remotely sited free fusion reactor already thoughtfully provided. However, I'm glad our neighborhood fusion reactor is 93 million miles away because it occasionally burps, and such solar flares will sooner or later destroy any unprotected power grid, as many still are. Against all these threats and more, our best protection is a portfolio of efficiently used, diverse, dispersed, renewable, resilient power supplies, the right size for the task, especially right on our roofs, not at the other end of a vast and brittle grid, and wired to work with or without that grid, as my house does. That resilient hookup should be our standard practice and a crucial element of national security, built one rooftop at a time. And all our filling stations for motor fuel should get solar power and batteries so we can fuel old-fashioned vehicles even if the grid fails. Now, carbon-free power is necessary but not sufficient. We also need cheap and fast. So we need to count carbon and cost and speed. At actual market prices and deployment speeds, new nuclear plants would save many-fold less carbon per dollar and per year than cheaper, faster efficiency or modern renewables. And the US grid will already be decarbonized by then anyway. So just operating, let alone further subsidizing existing nuclear plants, wastes money that could buy cheaper options, saving even more carbon. The more urgent you think climate change is, the more vital it is to buy cheap, fast, proven solutions, not costly, slow, speculative ones. So when someone tells you climate change is so urgent that we need all of the above, remember Peter Bradford's reply. He said, "We're not picking and backing winners. They don't need it. We're picking and backing losers." That makes climate change worse. There are no proposed changes in size, technology, or fuel cycle that would change these conclusions. They're intrinsic to all nuclear technology. And global nuclear power adds each year at most as much supply as renewables add every few days. A climate non-solution is not worth paying for, let alone extra. And nuclear simply has no business case or operational need. It offers no benefits for grid reliability or resilience justifying special treatment. In fact, its inflexibility and ungraceful failures complicate modern grid operations. And as I remarked in an Aspen conference yesterday, small nukes save money just as a smaller helping of foie gras helps you lose weight. Now, Mike Barnard just analyzed a natural experiment China's been doing, comparing nuclear with wind plus solar deployment. And of course, China is the world's biggest installer of wind and solar and nuclear. So using local capacity factors, the nuclear capacity China added last year will produce only 2% as much electricity as the solar and wind capacity China added last year. Both these sets of technologies have every advantage they could possibly need. They don't suffer from any of the factors normally blamed for nuclear distress elsewhere, but they scale very differently. And the wind and solar are 2 or 3 times cheaper. So 50-fold faster addition of electricity. And, no wonder in the first half of this year, for the first time, less than half of China's electricity was coal-fired. And yet we're
Amory?
still often told
Oh,
that
Amory, I
only,
apologize for interjecting, but we're at 10:30. I know you
yes,
started a few minutes late. It was like 6 minutes late. Is it possible to wrap up just so we can stay on
yes,
schedule?
I'm in my last
Off you go. Sorry.
probably 7
Continue.
minutes or so.
Continue.
Thank you. Yeah, we're still told that only coal, gas, and nuclear can keep the lights on because they're 24/7, while wind and solar are variable and hence unreliable. But variable doesn't mean unpredictable. Here's how accurately the French grid operator in a stormy winter month a decade ago forecast a day ahead the output of the country's wind farms. They would do well to forecast demand that accurately. And forecasting has since improved so much that the Danish wind operators bid day ahead wind power into the hourly auction just as confidently as fossil fuel generators, but a lot more profitably. Indeed, we built the grid because no generator is 24/7. They all break. And when a giant plant fails, losing a gigawatt in milliseconds, often abruptly for weeks or months, grids manage this intermittence by backing up failed plants with working plants. And in exactly the same way, but often at lower cost, grids can manage the forecastable variations of solar and wind by backing up those variable renewables with a portfolio of other renewables, all forecasted, integrated, and diversified by type and location. So in hot and often humid Texas, with a 99% isolated grid and no big hydro, a 2050 summer week of expected loads can get much smaller and less peaky with profitably efficient use. Then we can make 86% of the annual electricity with wind and PVs and 14% from dispatchable renewables. This 100% renewable supply can then match the load by putting the surplus electricity into two kinds of distributed storage worth buying anyway: ice storage, air conditioning, and smart bidirectional charging of EVs, and then recovering that energy when needed and filling the last gaps with unobtrusively flexible demand. That yields 100% renewable power every hour of the year with no bulk storage and with only about 5% left over to decarbonize other sectors. So the economics would be excellent even at today's prices. Some grid operators do this kind of choreography today. And a lot of European countries with modest or no hydropower are meeting about half to three-fourths or more of their annual electric needs, uh, with renewables very cost effectively. Okay, now we get to the numbers on that. And yet adding in general no bulk storage and with superior and rising reliability. In fact, Denmark and Germany have 5 times or more reliable power than America does. So as Clay Stranger says, the operators have learned to run their grids the way a conductor leads a symphony orchestra. No instrument plays all the time, but the ensemble continuously makes beautiful music. And and an even more interesting example now than Denmark is South Australia, 3 gigawatt grid making its annual electricity three-fourths by solar and wind and expecting 100% next year. And now 37 big companies want to build factories there because renewables can do our hardest tasks. That's why solar and wind will chiefly power Australia's newest aluminum smelter and copper mine using renewable baseload contracts. It's why their iron region is shifting to robotic solar field installation and self-lifting wind turbines that go up in a day. Colorado has a steel mill over 90% solar powered. Apple has run a bunch of data centers on renewables for over a decade. The Pentagon prefers renewables to power its most critical missions. Despite such empirical examples, standard models say we need giant fossil or nuclear plants to keep the grid reliable as it gets renewable. But their error is omitting most of the grid balancing solutions. The full competitive landscape includes 10 carbon-free ways, conceptually sketched here, to balance the grid across all timescales, not just big batteries in magenta and without needing fossil backup in red. Your actual cost will vary, but bulk storage comes last, not first. So we needn't wait for a storage miracle, though some are emerging and the market isn't waiting. Long, calm, cloudy periods are often raised as another objection to renewables. But the 99.999% reliable German network Physicist has analyzed Europe's Dunkelflaute, the dark doldrums, widely claimed to need months or seasons or even years of backup power. The actual need turns out to be only up to a week or two, totaling about 6% of winter electric use. And that could come just from existing gas capacity burning green molecules like hydrogen or ammonia made at other times from surplus solar and wind. So the long assumed need for massive long duration storage was not found, partly because this study included 4 of our 10 grid balancing resources. To end, mindful markets are our most powerful tool for speeding the energy transformation, and markets can flip with breathtaking speed. On Fifth Avenue in New York, in 1900, you have to look hard for the first car. 13 years later, you have to look harder for the last horse. The horse and buggy industry thought it would have many decades to adapt, but Ford's Model T got 62% cheaper in 13 years. Car-owning households soared from 8 to about 60% in a decade, three-quarters financed by a GM and DuPont innovation called car loans. Well, today our solar modules just got 80% cheaper in 5 years, 96% since 2010. Three-quarters of our rooftop solar is innovatively financed, and Ford's and Edison's industries are merging to eat Rockefeller's industry. So the pace of transformation is set not by incumbents, but by insurgents who are not inhibited by the incumbents' business models, legacy assets, or cultures. Moreover, investors flee before customers do, because capital markets keenly sniff out disruption. And once they think you're in or even headed for the toaster, they don't wait for the toast to get done before they decapitalize you and invest in your successors. That's why trillions of dollars already have prudently fled the fossil industries as they hemorrhage capital, talent, and clout. Before Putin's war, the world's top 16 listed hydrocarbon companies combined were worth less than Apple, and all the world's significant automakers combined were worth less than Tesla. In the turbulence now supercharged by Trump's war, customers may bypass unloved suppliers, many regulators must play catch-up, pre-stranded assets will abound, and business as usual will be the riskiest thing you can do. One final thought. The energy transformation I've summarized is not just fundamental, it's elemental. The first industrial revolution was the age of carbon, creating our prosperity and the world's mightiest industries from coal and oil and gas. But now that obsolete age of carbon is giving way to the modern age of silicon. Silicon microchips, telecoms, and software turn people from isolated to networked, systems from dumb to smart, grids from analog to digital, potentially from dirigiste to democratized. Silicon power electronics make electricity interconvertible and precisely applicable, replacing fiery molecules with obedient electrons. And silicon solar cells enable the ascent of energy from mining the fires of hell to harvesting the breath and radiance of heaven. Our responsibility and opportunity is to help enable the new energy system, not protect the old, to build back better, to move fast and fix things, so the global energy transformation can move at the pace and cost of design and software, not of infrastructure, and can be not constrained by the inertia of incumbents, but sped by the ambition of insurgents like you.